Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of History in the Dark. I am your host, Darkness the Curse. And before we begin, as always, thank you so much to my generous Patreons, my British rail critics, as well as my underwater train finders, Thomas Ward and Lord Captain Von Thrust III. You are the reason why this content remains subterranean. That's not really underground at all. I mean, I guess if you consider the underground, it sounds kind of edgy. I'm down with that, but I wouldn't say that I'm like an underground radio station or something like that. I'm pretty out in the open. Definitely not like today's subject, because today, on yet another video about a train that wound up in a really weird place, we are talking about the Cobble Hill Tunnel, also known as the Atlantic Avenue Tunnel, and the locomotive rumored to be hiding within. Also, it's worth noting the tunnel is located right underneath Brooklyn, New York City. Yes, really. The Cobble Hill Tunnel, or the Atlantic Avenue Tunnel, was originally built in 1844 as an open cut, which is kind of like a half tunnel. It's basically a tunnel without a roof. It was eventually roofed over into, well, a tunnel. It was utilized by the Brooklyn and Jamaica Railroad, so they could use it to transport people to the South Ferry over to Manhattan. The tunnel was a solid piece of work for its day, and it's actually the oldest railway tunnel beneath a city street in North America that was fully devoted to rail. There are a few older tunnels that had both rail lines and other vehicles or people in them, but this one was specifically for a rail line. Additionally, it's considered the oldest subway tunnel by the Guinness Book of World Records, although that's a little debatable as there are other examples of similar tunnels having been a few years older. But either way, it's old. Very old. But why would there be a locomotive inside it? Well, that's because the tunnel was closed in 1861. What happened was the New York State legislature voted to ban railroad locomotives from within the limits of the city of Brooklyn. Why would they want to do this? But the actual reason may have been down to corruption, believe it or not. The New York State governor was one John A. King, and he was a major shareholder in the Brooklyn and Jamaica Railroad, later known as the Long Island Railroad. Because they were closing the line down, in the interest of fairness, a tax assessment was ordered on all property owners along Atlantic Street in order to defray the cost of the closure. The railroad, naturally, benefited from this, so there's the theory that they may have wanted to close the line anyway because it wasn't profitable enough, but also wanted that sweet tax assessment money. There's no proof of this, but regardless, the tunnel was closed, and it was pretty much forgotten, and fell into stories of legend and rumor. During World War I, some people started saying that German spies were using the tunnel to make bombs, and the Bureau of Investigation even broke through the roof of the tunnel with jackhammers to check. They found nothing, installed an electric light, and resealed it. In the 1920s, during Prohibition, it was rumored the tunnel was being used to make bootleg whiskey. There was no evidence of this, and no one ever went to check. In 1936, the New York City Police Department tried to enter the tunnel because they thought a body of a hoodlum might be inside. They did not gain access to the tunnel. In 1941, another rumor said it was inspected by the Works Progress Administration to determine its structural strength, which actually seems logical because it is sitting under a major part of the city. You'd want to make sure that tunnel wasn't going to collapse at any point, but there's actually no evidence that ever occurred. A few years after that, it was rumored to be reopened again, this time by the FBI looking for spies, but there's no evidence of that happening. And more relevantly, and more factually, in the 1950s, it was sought by two rail historians, George Horne and Martin Schnachny, but they did not gain access to the tunnel. It was not until 1980, when a then 20-year-old Robert Diamond stumbled upon the remains of the tunnel. He entered in through a manhole he located at Atlantic Avenue and Court Street, and then crawled a distance of about 70 feet through a filled-in section that was less than 2 feet high. That's when he found the bulkhead wall that sealed off the main portion of the tunnel. He managed to convince a Brooklyn Union Gas Company engineering crew to help him break through the massive concrete bulkhead wall, which they found out was actually several feet thick. Past that, he gained access to the main portion of the tunnel, and then he began to popularize the tunnel as an antiquity. He hosted tours through it from 1982 until December 17th, 2010, which is where the locomotive comes in. Like I said, Robert was always hosting these tours through the tunnel, but it had always been kind of a shaky tour at best. There was no access to the tunnel from any means but that manhole, so every time he took people on a tour, they literally had to go down the manhole. which is a weird way to start a state-licensed tour, but he did it for a long time. They let him do it. That was until 2010, when the Department of Transportation, the DOT, terminated his contract and forbade him to re-enter the tunnel, citing safety concerns. Now, at face value, that makes a lot of sense, but that is until you bring into the equation the locomotive. Diamond believes wholeheartedly there is a locomotive down in that tunnel. It was left behind when the tunnel was filled in. The locomotive itself would have been built in the 1830s, and it appears to be a 220. It's small, but would have made sense for the time and the tunnel. Thing is, Roberts never actually found the locomotive down there. Even though he hosted the tours for over 2 decades, the locomotive itself is in a part of the tunnel that he has never been able to access. But through the use of a magnometer, he believes that he has found it right under Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn. Right about the time this was going on, Robert actually was in talks with National Geographic. Yes, the National Geographic, who wanted to film Robert and a team going down and finding the locomotive. This seems like something that National Geographic would be really gung-ho about, and they were. The problem was, during the process to get the permits in place to do something like this, and to investigate further into the tunnel, that is when the DOT decided to pull the rug out from under them. The DOT said it was too dangerous, and refused to allow Robert or Nat Geo to press on top of forbidding him to run his regular tours at all. While safety concerns are being cited, it's debatable how true this actually is. See, what happened was, between Robert and the National Geographic investigation team, they pretty much confirmed there's a locomotive there without actually finding it. But the magnometer confirms there's at least something large and metal down there. It being a locomotive is a pretty reasonable idea, and if it is, it's probably in incredibly good condition. Out of all the locomotives I discussed on this channel, this one is likely in the best shape overall. It isn't underwater, it isn't underground. Well, it is, but it's in a hollow area underground, in the open air, yet also out of the elements. It's covered. It's in one of the best positions you could possibly ask for to be preserved. It probably has suffered some rust and decay over the years from just sitting, sure, but in terms of historical objects and preservation, this one's condition is likely to be incredibly good. All of this I just told you leaked to the press. Apparently this really infuriated Seth Solomanow at the Department of Transportation, and that's when he shut down all access to the tunnel. There's a lot of grudges going on in this story. Apparently the Department of Transportation never actually liked Robert Diamond doing what he did. It's just there was nothing inherently illegal about it at the time, so they let him go. And according to National Geographic, Diamond is a little, well, odd. Eccentric might be the word. He clearly loves the tunnel, loves the history, and wants the locomotive to see the light of day, but the way he goes about it is a little erratic. Right now he's in the middle of suing National Geographic, which seems like the absolute wrong thing to do, but he suspects that they're the ones that caused the Department of Transportation to shut him down, which doesn't really seem to be the case. Why would Nat Geo intentionally cause access to a historical site like this to be shut down? On purpose. That makes no sense. I suspect what's going on here is a couple of things. For one thing, the DOT just doesn't like Robert Diamond. Robert Diamond doesn't like them, doesn't like being told what to do, and everyone's fighting over the situation. But if you notice, the DOT didn't get mad until they said they found the locomotive. And I think that's where the problem is. It's the locomotive itself. Not just the fact that it's there, but where it is exactly. See, here's what's going to happen. Let's say they did allow National Geographic and Diamond to go down and find this thing. Let's say they find it. They confirm it's there, sitting, in what I can guess would be in pretty good condition, all things considered. Now, what do you think they're going to want to do? They're not going to want to leave it there. Once they confirm this thing is there, people are going to want to get it out of there. This is a piece of history, of city history. There's going to be rail fans from all across the world clamoring to see this thing, wanting it to be removed from the tunnel and preserved. The problem the DOT would have then is the massive amount of headache it would take to deal with everyone clamoring to get the thing out of there. If they say no, everyone's going to be mad at them. They're already mad at them, but they'll be really mad at them if they don't let them get the locomotive out of there. But if they do, then they gotta deal with the idea of a main street in Brooklyn, New York, already a place that has a ton of traffic, being shut down while this locomotive is extracted from beneath it. You'd have to tear in through the street itself, navigate around water pipes and gas lines, and then lift it out of there. Oh, and put everything back the way you found it. Exactly. Such a process would, I would imagine, take at least a week, meaning they would have to shut down a street for a week to get a locomotive out of a long abandoned tunnel. I just don't think it's a headache the DOT wants to deal with at all, and I understand that, but they are denying the discovery of a major part of the city of New York's history. It's something relevant to that city's past, and depending on what kind of locomotive it is, it may be the only one left in existence and needs to be preserved in a museum somewhere. The whole thing comes across as incredibly frustrating, and all sides in the argument have valid points, but if you're asking my honest opinion on it, from the way it looks, it just seems like the Department of Transportation is being just a little corrupt because they don't want to address something that they could easily shut down. Which just comes across as cowardly if you ask me, but it happens. I don't know how much Robert Diamond has annoyed them over the years. Maybe he asked for it. I don't know the man myself. Like I said, Nat Geo finds him a little eccentric. But as it stands right now, access to the tunnel was cut off in 2011. And the DOT has not budged on the subject since. But hopefully eventually the DOT chooses to be a little lenient on the subject and allow at least an investigation. I'm not going to push hard for this locomotive to be taken out of the tunnel if it's going to be that much of a hassle. I understand that you have city infrastructure to worry about, you have people just living their lives around, and they don't want to be interrupted by extracting a locomotive from underground. Okay, I follow that logic. But also, you could at least let us see what's there. Like, it may not be anything. Maybe a big pile of metal for all we know. But I just want to know, is that a locomotive or isn't it? Just let us figure it out. That's all I'm saying.
And lastly, I'm also very sorry to say that as I was editing this video for upload, I learned that Robert Diamond had passed away within the last year. He died in his home back in August, without ever regaining access to his tunnel. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.